Good evening. All schools across Britain will close by the end of the week until further notice as the death toll from coronavirus reached 104. Boris Johnson said schools will close their doors by Friday. From next week, most children will be at home until further notice, except for children of key workers like NHS staff, police and delivery workers, as well as the most vulnerable. A-levels and GCSEs will not go ahead in England and Wales. A decision has yet to be made in Scotland and Northern Ireland. The government said it would make sure every child got the proper recognition they deserve, but didn't say how. The dramatic move came as the number of confirmed cases of coronavirus in the UK jumped by almost 700 to 2,626. 104 people have now died. The NHS said those who died in England were aged between 59 and 94 and had underlying health conditions. Our political editor, Laura Koonsberg, is in Westminster. Laura.
Sophie, this was a decision that the government never wanted to have to take, a decision that they put off until they felt it was the crucial moment to act. But as the number of people infected by this disease continues to mount, so too the impact on all of our lives continues to become more and more profound. And this time it has turned the lives of millions of children and therefore millions of families around the country upside down, with school gates closing after lessons on Friday for a time being, and no one knows until when. Home time, not just till the morning, but maybe for many months. The school bell on Friday will signal the end of normal life for millions of families for the foreseeable future.
I think it's good for the children, right? But I think it's going to be hard for the parents that have still got to go to work.
I'm very worried about it.
Why?
Because it's scary. It's killing the people.
I'm a kind of stay-at-home dad, so it's not such a problem. My wife is kind of main breadwinner, so it's not too bad.
It's perhaps not the last resort for the government, but certainly closing school gates was one of the measures ministers were desperate to avoid.
After schools shut their gates from Friday afternoon, they will remain closed for most pupils, for the vast majority of pupils, until further notice. Now, I know that these steps will not be easy for parents or for teachers, and for many parents this will be frustrating, and it will make it harder for them to go out to work.
Families will wonder, maybe more than anything else tonight, how long these closures might last.
Sure.
Can you give us any indication?
Our judgment right now is that this is the moment to provide further downward pressure. I wish I could give you an answer about how long it will be, Laura, but we've got to do it right now.
For the children of key workers, it could mean school as usual, but for teenagers, that means exams off for now.
We've worked so hard, and the past 2 years, it's always had that long end goal, GCSEs, and it's just got to the point where that's in sight, and now it's not anymore. So
school closures could make business even trickier for firms struggling to stay afloat.
She can get them for Mother's Day. That would be brilliant.
Yeah. Sally Field, a florist in Bristol, has plenty of orders for Mother's Day. But despite the government's promise to prop up the economy with hundreds of billions of pounds of loans, she is uncertain, deeply uncertain, about what might come next.
If the staff were to have to not come in, look after their children, if we don't get the orders in, I won't be able to pay the rent of the shop. It's a massive worry.
There's a rush for more support. The government promised tonight to help renters with a plan to ban evictions. With well over 2,500 cases of the disease, ministers and officials keep vowing to do whatever it takes. Whitehall is scrambling to keep up with the demands of this crisis, for the government to be able to explain quickly and precisely exactly how they plan to keep the many promises that have been made. There's a sense there could be more interventions and more restrictions on the way. The national safety net's expanding, but there are still holes, like the gaps on the Commons green benches today, MPs deliberately keeping their distance. Coronavirus may be a mild illness for the majority, but the effects on the country could be grave. Laura Koonsberg, BBC News, Westminster.
The closure of schools poses a huge challenge to parents who are trying to earn a living, many of them now working from home. The government also stressed that children shouldn't be left with grandparents, who are the most vulnerable to the virus. All exams have been cancelled in England and Wales, and Scotland and Northern Ireland are due to make a decision in the coming days. Our education editor, Bronwyn Jeffries, reports.
You need to take home your books and anything else that you need in order to be able to work successfully at home.
A last glimpse of normal school life before education is largely set aside. Schools instead a crisis service. Head teachers now expected to lead.
Well, I suppose there's been a sense of real inevitability. We've got to muck in. This is a national emergency, and schools are the bedrock of communities, and we will do everything that we possibly can to help.
They've worked for exams now cancelled in England, even before they knew for certain they were worried about next steps.
Your future, which you have to be worried about, getting your qualifications, how that's going to affect your life in the future, so it's a really big issue at the moment.
It's our year group for GCSEs, but for others it's their year group for A-levels, for first year at university, all sorts of things, and it's just so disruptive for everyone's lives.
Everyone's been saying how they think it will completely impact the way that we all socially interact, like moving forward, so handshakes, greetings, etc. And it just, yeah, it's quite an eye-opener.
So that's it. Schools closed for the foreseeable future. They will still have a stripped back role, providing somewhere safe for the children of key workers, such as those working in the NHS, and looking out for vulnerable children.
But that's only children with social workers or those with education healthcare plans. As classrooms empty, no place for those on free school meals, only an offer of food vouchers. And for parents, challenges ahead.
Well, fortunately I work from home and so does my husband, so it won't affect us, but I'm pretty sure it's going to have a significant impact on lots of other parents.
Especially knowing that it's going to go around the school and come home to every, grandparent, other person in your life, everyone could get it. So the sooner they shut it down, the better.
For children, the anchor of routine cut loose, as schools prepared to ride out this storm. Bronwyn Jeffries, BBC News, West Sussex.
Well, let's talk to our political editor, Laura Kuensberg in Westminster. And Laura, we seem to be following in the footsteps of countries like France and Spain. School closures this week. A lot of people wondering if there are going to be further restrictions next.
Well, Sophie, the government's position has always been quite clear that they have taken decisions as and when the data looked at and produced by government scientists has been changing over time. But they've also been quite clear that there's been a range of things on the table, a kind of series of steps, or to use the jargon that's been used in Whitehall, it's like a ladder with different rungs. And as we go up the stage of getting through this outbreak, the government needs to take different actions to try to clamp down, and above all else, of course, to save lives. It was notable today that the Prime Minister didn't rule out increasing the level of restrictions on our lives. In fact, he was quite explicit in doing so. But I think that said, we should also be clear that the government has been trying very hard and clear about the fact that they are taking a step-by-step approach. They are trying to be guided every day by the best information that is put forward to them in what is clearly a very rapidly changing situation, where all sorts of demands are being put on everybody in government and, of course, everybody around the country. And there's no question with that schools announcement today, that's been something that's been coming for a while. The direction of travel has been quite clear. But we are already at a stage where people's lives are being profoundly changed by the way in which this disease is unfolding, not just in this country, but of course around the world. And there is a sense that Whitehall is really trying to scramble to keep up with the pace of how this disease is spreading. And for the government, of course, that means there are no straightforward decisions here. They're making very, very big promises, but there is, of course, a lot of political pressure over how in the days, weeks and months they'll be able really to make them come true.
Laura Kuensberg, thank you. Well, another main focus today was on the legislation being brought forward to protect tenants who may soon be at risk of eviction and the 3-month mortgage payment holidays extended to landlords. There have also been concerns about a lack of support for people who work for themselves. Our political correspondent Alex Forsyth has been speaking to people to find out how small businesses and those who are self-employed are coping.
Simply staying open is the priority for many small businesses now. Hetty spent years building up her cake supplier, but demand has slumped. Determined to keep going, she's offering brownies by mail order to stay afloat.
The feeling is definitely like fear of losing everything, but I'm trying to stay positive as best as I can.
She says new government measures, grants, help with sick pay are hugely welcome. But reluctant to take out a loan, her biggest fear is how to keep paying her 6 members of staff.
I don't want to lose them. If I could put them on some kind of subsidised paid redundancy or temporary redundancy, that would be ideal, and then they can cover their costs and we can still afford to keep running perhaps at a lower capacity in the meantime.
The government has offered billions to stop businesses closing, but some want more support for those who face losing their jobs, or those self-employed or not in line for sick pay. John is a freelance lighting designer. His work has completely dried up. He's thinking of selling his car to help with rent and bills, saying people in his position have no safety net.
Anything will be a good start. Maybe suppress credit card interest. People are going to go into debt spirals just putting their shopping on their credit cards. Otherwise, it's really distressing, not just for me, but to see, all my friends and colleagues in the same boat. It's just happened all in the same week.
The government's been clear. The measures announced for businesses so far are just the start. It said there will be more support for those struggling. And today the Prime Minister promised no one will be evicted if they can't pay their rent because of coronavirus. This letting agent says detail is key, but welcomes news that landlords will be given a mortgage break to help tenants who can't pay.
It's brilliant that we've got support for tenants and that they know they're not going to be evicted during this time. We just now need to make sure that the tenants know where to go for the help, and that also landlords know where they can also go for the help if the tenant can't pay. With the next few days and weeks so uncertain, so many will be relying on support to simply keep going. Alex Forsyth, BBC News, Gloucester.
The pound has plunged to its lowest level in 35 years, trading at $1.15 as the threat of coronavirus spooked investors. It comes as financial markets tumbled again after major stimulus plans failed to quell fears about the economic impact of the virus. Our economics editor, Faisal Islam, reports.
The city is emptier than it ever has been on a trading afternoon as bankers and traders work from home. But the international financial markets are still open, and today they set their sights on the UK, forcing up government borrowing rates and sending the pound sterling plunging to near record lows. The pound fell up to 5% today against the dollar, meaning a 12% fall since early last week, down to its lowest level since 1985. It also fell sharply against the euro. In New York, some sharp stock market falls suspended trading yet again. The Dow Jones ending up at a lower level than inherited by President Trump. But the US dollar is strengthening as investors seek out safe havens. Some have suggested that these massive daily market moves are not helping pandemic fighting efforts and they should be suspended. This morning, the governor of the Bank of England told the BBC that the markets should be kept open, but he warned speculators to think very carefully about exploiting the crisis.
You need to think very carefully, going out and frankly shorting in a way that is just designed to sort of deliberately exploit the situation. Just stop and think about, frankly, the broader ethics of what you're doing.
It is an extraordinary sight, this symbolic heart of British capitalism. There's hardly any people, traffic, tourists, workers, and that's a good sign for public health, but it's a bad sign for the economy. It shows something close to recession. And it's the job of this institution, the Bank of England and Governor Andrew Bailey, to use its unlimited firepower to stop that getting much worse and having permanent economic scars of a depression. Industries across the UK have been closing down, from car factories to airlines, laying off workers at least temporarily, some without pay. What is your message to a boss right now facing plunging customer revenue, massive uncertainty, and hovering over a computer mouse deciding whether or not to click and fire people or not pay people?
Stop. Look at what's available. Look at what the government's doing. Look at what the Bank of England's doing. We're working in close coordination. Look at what's available. Come and talk to us. Talk to the government. Talk to us before you take that decision, because supporting companies and enabling companies to support their workforces is critical here. But the economic challenges are spreading. Reduced services in the rail industry, another sector to bail out for a government vowing to use whatever it takes to prevent the whole economy coming off the track. Faisal Islam, BBC News.
The government says it wants to increase the number of people being tested for coronavirus from around 5,000 a day at the moment to up to 25,000 a day in a few weeks' time. Meanwhile, some frontline staff say they're worried and scared about the lack of protective equipment available when they're treating patients. But the Prime Minister told MPs that there was a massive effort ongoing to ensure that staff had enough equipment to deal with the outbreak. Here's our health editor, Hugh Pym.
This is a message from the government's Chief Medical Officer about coronavirus.
It's important we all protect older people and those with existing health conditions from coronavirus.
Starring in a new TV advert, the Chief Medical Officer for England getting his message straight into people's homes.
If symptoms are mild, you should all stay at home.
Good morning, Mr. Whitty.
Chris Whitty, hardly known a few weeks ago, is now a household name at the forefront of plans to tackle the coronavirus threat. One of the problems they're facing up to is protection for NHS staff. Some say they haven't got masks and other personal protective equipment, PPE, so they're at risk of infection at work.
We don't feel that the government has been transparent with how many masks they have, how many advanced masks they have, and how much protective equipment is available for frontline staff over the coming days, weeks and months. We fear that it might be already too late. If I've already been exposed, then it's too late.
In the Commons, the Prime Minister wanted to reassure staff it was a priority.
There is a massive effort going on, comparable to the effort to build enough ventilators to ensure that we have adequate supplies of PPE equipment, not just now, but throughout the outbreak.
A major ventilator company, though, said the UK was very poorly equipped. Ministers this week appealed to British businesses to develop new products. The government says virus testing will be more than doubled to 25,000 a day, focusing first on hospitals, then on extra tests for staff and in the community. Preparations for a surge in very sick patients include a temporary mortuary set up to increase capacity by Westminster Council. And the NHS is clearing the decks. At the Whittington Hospital in North London, they've prepared this ward with piped oxygen for COVID-19 patients. The beds are normally used for those who've had non-urgent operations. They've now been stopped for the next few months.
Okay, so this is my tiny attic room. It's our kind of spare room. 2 beds, 1 small window to the garden. And that's about it, really. And I've been here since Friday.
Dr. Maria Goddard told me what it's like to be isolated and unwell with coronavirus symptoms.
It's just complete exhaustion, cough, fever, slightly short of breath.
So how well prepared does she think the NHS is?
I've worked at the NHS for more than 30 years. This is unprecedented response and it's really impressive. I'm very, very impressed and I think the public will be very well looked after. I just hope that the resource is enough.
And that's the big question. Will the NHS preparations be enough? Nobody right now can really answer that. Hugh Pym, BBC News.
Major supermarkets are taking new measures to try and stop panic buyers emptying the shelves. Leading grocery brands are keen to stress that the food supply chain is still functioning and there is enough for everyone as long as shoppers behave responsibly. Emma Simpson reports.
They're open, but just for elderly and vulnerable customers. At this Iceland branch in Glasgow today, a 2-hour window to shop before the masses. And it's gone down well.
It's brilliant, honest to God, tremendous. I don't know how long it'll last.
I've got quite a few neighbours who are quite elderly and they might need help as well. So that's why I got 2. You're allowed to take 2.
Sainsbury's is saving the first hour at all its 600 supermarkets tomorrow for those most in need. Not easy when demand's still growing. This was the scene at 6:30 a.m. this morning in southwest London. Shoppers queuing for the doors of this supermarket to open.
We are asking everyone to do the right thing as they show up tomorrow morning. We are seeing more food coming into our supermarkets every day, more than any other time of the year, and we are continuing to be able to enable that supply. If everybody bought what they needed for themselves and for their family, there will be enough food.
Our supermarkets are now on a crisis footing, putting in place unprecedented measures to keep the food on the shelves. Everyone, to some extent, is limiting the amount of products customers can buy. For our biggest grocers, it's now 3 items on all products. At Sainsbury's, for the most popular essentials, it's down to 2. Supermarkets are also streamlining their operations. For instance, Sainsbury's, Asda and Tesco are closing specialist counters to free up staff. Ocado, the online grocer, is shutting down its entire website until Saturday for changes to free up more delivery slots. Right now, it can no longer meet demand. At Morrison's, they're getting ready to produce basic food parcels, which can be ordered by phone. They'll be dispatched direct from their distribution centres starting next week. Another example of how our supermarkets are working to keep everyone fed. Emma Simpson, BBC News.
Older and disabled people who are cared for at home are particularly vulnerable, and the care companies who look after them say they're having problems getting protective equipment. The government says it will be made available. They're also calling for virus testing for their staff and financial help to meet the pressures. Here's our social affairs correspondent, Alison Holt.
We've had a couple of issues. Is there any chance that you can pick up a couple of double-ups this evening?
In the control room of Trinity Home Care in Surrey, care coordinators are busy managing the increasing pressures on their staff caused by the coronavirus and reassuring the older and disabled people they look after.
We ain't going to let you completely run out of food. We will grab some bits.
It's quite high risk, so I don't want too many carers going in and out at the moment.
On the prescription, usually there's a date of when it was prescribed.
They are training new care workers to try to meet the growing need. But in a sector which has faced years of underfunding and staff shortages, many care companies say they're already struggling. Frustrating for senior care worker Shona, who has a lung condition, so is now office-based to keep her safe.
I will miss my clients because they're so used to me calling in and seeing them. And I've had to explain, not tell them what's wrong with me, but just that I will not be physically visiting them, but I'll make sure that they're well looked after.
Care providers are also desperate for protective equipment like gloves and face masks needed to care for people with COVID-19, and they want testing for staff so those without the virus can work. Company bosses say to cope, firms need councils to start paying for services up front.
The role of the care sector has been understated at all times. In recent years, we've seen a decimation of funding to this sector. We are the 4th emergency sector, and we need to be recognised as that.
The government says companies will get more financial support and personal protection equipment is on its way. Alison Holt, BBC News.